Hello and welcome to Noble Mind.
Noble Mind is a podcast exploring mindfulness, meditation, and psychology.
Before we get started, I want to invite you to come to Unwind, a free drop-in practice session that I'm leading each week on Zoom. It lasts about 30 minutes and just long enough, hopefully, to fit between all your other tasks and to-dos. Each week, I give a brief science-backed tip to help with stress management or well-being enhancement. Then we spend about 15 minutes in a guided relaxation, meditation, or contemplation practice. Lastly, we end with a few minutes for discussion and personal connection. I encourage people to make the session work for themselves, so if you prefer to call in or keep your camera off, that is just fine. You can get more details and sign up to get the Zoom link and call-in information at drkateking.com/unwind. Hope to see you there. Hello, I'm Dr. Kate King.
And I'm Alex Gökçe. In this episode, we talk to Dr. Stan Steindl about using the motivational interviewing approach to enhance behavior change and to address blocks to compassion. We also explore ways of developing the courage to be compassionate and the importance of honoring the wisdom of our ambivalence.
Dr. Stan Steindl is a clinical psychologist in private practice at Psychology Consultants and an adjunct associate professor at University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia. He is co-director of the UQ Compassionate Mind Research Group and a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers. He has over 20 years' experience as a therapist, supervisor, and trainer, and works with clients from motivational interviewing and compassion-focused therapy perspectives. You can get this episode's show notes and join our email list at noblemindpodcast.com. We hope you enjoy this show.
We are here with Stan Steindl. Welcome, Stan.
Hello. Good morning. Good morning, my time.
Good evening, our time. Would you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your work, and what excites and inspires you?
Yeah, sure. I'm a clinical psychologist at Psychology Consultants, a private practice here in Brisbane, Australia. I'm also an adjunct associate professor at the School of Psychology at the University of Queensland. And we have at UQ the Compassionate Mind Research Group. And really both my clinical and research interests are very much around helping people make helpful changes in their lives. And on the one hand, exploring the barriers to change and on the other hand, exploring just what might motivate people to make commitments, take helpful actions, and of course, the role of compassion and self-compassion in all of that.
I wonder if we could just kind of step back and think about motivation in general, maybe. How do you understand that as someone who practices motivational interviewing? And then what is this motivational interviewing thing for folks who may not be so familiar?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, as I say, behavior change is difficult. I mean, if you think about it, it's a rather cruel twist of fate that, sitting on the couch, eating ice cream, maybe some beers, watching Netflix isn't good for our health. Instead, we have to exercise, watch what we eat, maybe try not to drink too much and so on. And the old saying, a good life isn't the same as a life that always feels good. And so, people are torn about all that. There are good things and not so good things about everything. And if you think of, those usual suspects, smoking, drinking, diet, exercise, people feel, ambivalent about what to do with all that. I need to exercise because I've been told I'm pre-hypertensive, but I don't have time to exercise because I'm so busy at work. I don't know, have you heard that old chestnut, not enough time?
Yes, in between my own ears.
Coming out of your own mouth, yes. Exactly. That's right. Well, that's interesting. We all understand ambivalence. We all experience it. I need to, but I can't. Or I could, but I don't think I need to. Or I should and I could, but I don't want to. These are just some of the kinds of ambivalence that we might experience when we're contemplating some sort of behavior change. And so people feel ambivalent. And then sometimes if someone tries to tell them what to do, like, you should start exercising, well, they often start arguing back, but I don't have time, or I hate going to the gym, or it's too cold, or it's too hot, or, lots of arguing against change can be evoked when we try to tell people what to do. And there's another old saying, I know what I believe when I hear myself speak. And so if people hear themselves arguing against change, then that's what they'll believe. They'll convince themselves not to change. And I guess this is where motivational interviewing has something to offer, a sort of more formal definition, I guess, of MI from Bill Miller and Stephen Rolnick in their core text from 2013. But they would say MI is a collaborative, goal-oriented style of communication with particular attention to the language of change. It's designed to strengthen motivation for and commitment to a specific goal by eliciting and exploring the person's own reasons for change within an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. So basically, it's about creating a self-therapeutic relationship, having conversations with people in a way that invites them to make their own arguments for change. In MI, we really try to give the person all the good lines, in a way. Rather than trying to tell them, we evoke it from them. So we listen carefully, we ask open questions, we reflect or paraphrase what they say, we affirm them and their strengths and qualities, and then every now and then we just summarize, their case for change across a number of dimensions, actually. Their desire for change, their ability to make the change, their reasons for change, and their need or the importance of change as well, ultimately perhaps making a commitment. And so, people end up with a sense of what they'd like to change, how they could do it, why they would do it, and what makes it important to them, and then ultimately what they will do next, what their commitment might be. But of course, people feel ambivalent about all of that, and so they also express, their desire, ability, reasons, and need not to change. And so we call that sustained talk. So on the one hand, the person's arguments for change are change talk, and then their arguments against change are called sustained talk. And really these are the two sides of their ambivalence. So in MI, we're working hard to listen and accept and validate the sustained talk, and then just gently guide the person towards the change talk, and possibly even helping them make a commitment, perhaps something small to start with, but something they feel strongly committed to doing. So that's kind of, I guess, motivation and motivational interviewing in a nutshell.
Thank you. That's great. One thing I love from my own exposure to motivational interviewing is the way it really gives equal attention, or at least a lot of attention, to both sides of that ambivalence, because as you're saying, it's very easy to just, sort of try to push your agenda to get a person to change or to get oneself to change, and to try to just like shove that other voice aside, don't ask about it, don't give it airtime, and hope it just crawls away somewhere.
Yes, often we begin in a real position of equipoise, where we're just equally poised on both sides of sustained talk and change talk, and really honouring that is the person's legitimate experience and kind of ambivalence. So, a little example might be, early on we might even say, if you were to make this change, how would things be different? A more neutral question, and they can talk about how it might be worse or how it might be better. But then later on, we might start to get a bit more guiding, and we might ask the question, if you were to make this change, how might things be better? Which, just one little word is different there. We use the word different, and it's a neutral question, and we use the word better, and it becomes a change talk evoking question.
I'm thinking about if you've got a loved one or a client who is struggling to change and you know they need to change in some way. Is there any instruction for motivational interviewing about how to work with your own maybe agenda or your own inner struggle that you might have in trying to like help a person make a change?
Yes, well, we describe sometimes what's called the righting reflex. And the righting reflex is really, our urge and desire to set things aright, to fix things. We know, for example, that, or we think we know, that if the person continues along this sort of road, that actually really difficult things might happen for them, and we want to prevent that. I mean, it's often coming from a very good and genuine place, but we slip into the righting reflex and we sort of take over, or we try to fix them, or we try to push them in a particular direction. And actually, to be honest, it's most difficult really when it's with someone who we really love or care about, or, I have a 15-year-old son, for example, and when he was 14, we were getting into all sorts of battles over homework. I'm sure a lot of people can probably relate to that. And it's sort of embarrassing given I'm here talking all about motivational interviewing, but I couldn't help but you need to do your maths or whatever. And eventually, last year, he just said, look, just leave it to me for a while. Let's see if I can do it myself, sort of thing. And he's got better grades in maths ever since. Wow. So I'm not saying that would always happen.
Right.
But it was just a very important lesson to me that we have to watch that righting reflex and really slow it down, open it up, listen, really accept and validate that other person's point of view and explore it and so on. Because, we are all deep wells. And at the bottom of that well is probably, mud and slush and frogs maybe or something like that. But there's also these pearls of wisdom, these pearls of motivation. And that's what it really is. If we can listen to that other person in an open-minded, open-hearted way, those pearls of motivation, they can be allowed to then just come to the surface for the person. All of a sudden, they're the ones saying, you know what? I do need to do some study tonight because, I don't want to fail this test and I want to, go to uni or whatever. And they start to make those arguments for change themselves.
Because the name of the approach, the fact that the word interviewing is in there, evokes some very different thoughts.
It's a great point. I've wondered about that too. I mean, I don't sort of complain too much because Bill and Steve, it's their creation. But yes, interviewing almost starts to sound like it's getting close to interrogation. And, so we don't want to tell people what to do, but we don't want to ask questions in a way that feels interrogating either. So it's a really great point. It's almost motivational conversations, is sort of what we're trying to do. We're trying to create a real conversational feel where the person feels safe, heard and understood, respected.
What is the relationship you see between motivation and compassion?
Yes. Well, this is the fascinating thing. I mean, there's various definitions of compassion. Maybe compassionate as a feeling or compassion as a value. But actually, Professor Paul Gilbert, who I know was on this podcast relatively recently, but he takes an evolutionary view, which is really a very comprehensive approach to it all. But one of the things is that he sees compassion as an evolved motive. So compassion is a sensitivity to suffering in self and others with a commitment to try to alleviate and prevent that suffering. And so it has these two psychologies, to engage with suffering and to take action to alleviate and prevent it. And motivation is really required for both. The motivation to open up our awareness and be sensitive and notice suffering in others or ourselves, and be willing to engage with that. I mean, all that takes motivation and dedication. And then to do something, take steps, act to alleviate it or prevent it. I mean, that takes a lot of motivation too, and courage. And, it's not easy. Compassion and self-compassion, for that matter, take a lot of dedication, courage, strength, wisdom, and commitment. I mean, if you imagine some of the big names in compassion around the world, Mother Teresa or Nelson Mandela or Greta Thunberg, or, these are compassionate people with enormous wisdom, strength, courage, and commitment to be willing to go there and to work to alleviate and prevent suffering. So, yeah, it sort of all comes back to that inherent compassionate motivation. And of course, for lots of us, ambivalence can come in too. We feel two ways about it, two ways about compassion. Again, behavior change is difficult, and actually compassion is also difficult, which is interesting. We often think, compassion is great and lovely and that sort of thing. But yeah, actually it's also difficult because it's about suffering, others' suffering and our own. And so, we can know that compassion and self-compassion are good, and there can be reservations or barriers or inhibitors to actually doing it. So in that sense, compassion is a motivation, but then it comes along with this notion of ambivalence that in a sense, one might work through with a motivational interviewing kind of approach.
I very much enjoyed some of your YouTube videos about courage. And I think many people may think of compassion and self-compassion as a soft, fluffy quality. And I wonder if you can tell them more how courage is involved. You say to be honest takes courage, to be kind takes courage, to love takes courage.
Yes, well, if you think about the idea of stopping and helping someone, there's a lot of things that might spring to mind, like what if they get angry at me, or what if they make a scene, or, what if other people judge me because they don't think I'm doing the right thing in one way, shape or form. And so there can certainly be a fear or anxiety that bubbles up there. Mm-hmm. And, or, what if I don't really know what to do, or what if I, can't cope, because, it's all about suffering, and that's tough stuff. It's distressing, and there is absolutely a warmth and, a kindness or a care for well-being that's a part of compassion, but also this kind of strength and courage. Actually, Chris Germer, who I think has also been on your wonderful podcast, I'm actually very honoured to be here, to be honest, but he and Kristen Neff, I think, talk about the yin and yang of compassion or self-compassion. And I think that's a nice concept. And in Paul Gilbert's approach with compassion-focused therapy, compassion is thought to, have all of those elements, and not least wisdom, strength, courage, really important to be able to step forward and actually engage with that suffering and try to do something to help.
I'm thinking it also takes, to be compassionate and to take compassionate action, takes bandwidth and energy and resources and time. And if you're coming at your life from this feeling of scarcity or I don't have enough just to get by myself, whether it's I don't have enough time, I don't have enough energy, or any other kind of resource that you might bring to bear to the situation, that would also be inhibiting, but if you're sort of, as you're saying, courageous or brave and willing to take that chance that, hey, maybe I'll still have enough for me, or maybe there'll still be enough resources to go around, or maybe even being compassionate actually feeds me in some way.
Yeah, actually, there's a lot of, great stuff you've mentioned there. I mean, one of the things that occurs to me is, as I hear you talking, for me, that becomes ability, change talk, or sustained talk in the context of MI, and we would certainly want to explore that with respect to compassion. How does the person feel able? Do they have the confidence or the self-efficacy or the capacity in other ways to even do this thing? And being able to explore that and really work out, like if you were to bring compassion or self-compassion more into your life, how would you go about it? How might you do that? And where might you start? Or what might some of the strategies be? Or is it something smaller to begin with, and then build up confidence from there and so on? And ultimately, yes, the in amongst ability change talk is the piece around courage as well, and having that emotional courage to sort of to do it, and to go there.
And how do you combine motivational interviewing and compassion-focused therapy? Do you think of MI as a prelude to CFT, or do you weave them together?
Yes, I think they actually have a very synergistic relationship in many ways, because absolutely motivational interviewing can be a prelude to, for example, compassion-focused therapy or compassionate mind training or mindful self-compassion program. We could most definitely use MI as a way to just see, how do they feel about taking part in all of that, and what might their reservations be, or what might their motivations be, and then sort of commit to sort of going ahead. But then I think MI can also be really used throughout. One of the really profound contributions from Professor Gilbert is in this area of, he's really identified fears, blocks and resistances to compassion, actually across all three flows, the things that really inhibit us from being compassionate towards others, or inhibit us from receiving compassion from others, or being compassionate towards ourselves. And so throughout any particular intervention, we might bring motivational interviewing to some of that. In some ways, from the point of view of MI, motivational interviewing, and also thinking about compassion as a motivation, these fears, blocks and resistances kind of represent the sustained talk side of ambivalence. So we can sort of potentially weave elements of MI throughout the compassion-based intervention. Like if I'm compassionate towards others, they'll take advantage of me, or if I ask for compassion from others, they'll think I'm weak. Or being compassionate towards myself is too much like self-pity, it's too selfish. These are the kinds of fears, blocks and resistances, or from an MI point of view, these are the kind of sustained talk that might arise.
You also talk about wisdom talk and guided discovery.
Yes. Well, I think the key there is that fears, blocks and resistances are really important to work with. We don't want to fall into the trap of trying to persuade people that, of course, self-compassion is good, because on the basis of some of the MI theory, people will just say, no, it's not, not for me. And so we want to slow it down and listen and explore and accept and validate these fears. And really, there can be a whole range of personal, historical, cultural and other factors that might play into these fears. And so we want to understand all that and help the person feel understood. Actually, advanced MI really is just advanced listening. That's what it really amounts to. And in working with these fears, blocks and resistances, we want to understand the person and where they're coming from with all of that. And we want them to feel understood. So there's actually these two goals with listening: to understand and for the person to feel understood. And there's really, actually, when you stop and listen, there's a lot of wisdom in these fears. It's not that we want to listen to the fears to get people to move on from them or something. We really want to listen to the fears in a way that helps the person tap into, their own wisdom about all this. For example, a person might say, I don't like the idea of self-compassion. It just sounds too much like self-pity. And the therapist might say, yeah, you really don't want to be self-pitying. That just doesn't feel right for you. And then the person might say, but I know this comes from how I was raised. Mum would always say, no use crying over spilt milk. I think that taught me never to let my feelings show. So this is what we might call wisdom talk, when the person expresses their own intrinsic wisdom about themselves, their mind, how it works, how they came to be there, how they came to be who they are today. We're all shaped by our experiences. And so wisdom talk really involves people expressing how this, might have happened for them. They come across these insights. They're feeling safe and accepted, and they're feeling listened to, and they have the time and space to explore their own minds, and they come across these insights, this wisdom. And so that's what we might refer to as guided discovery. So we're listening in a way that really allows people to discover their own wisdom. And then they express that, and we might call that wisdom talk. I mean, that's a little concept that we've sort of coined to go alongside the idea of change talk and sustain talk, and then there's this wisdom talk, I suppose, is what we said. But remember, I know what I believe when I hear myself speak. Much more powerful to listen in a way that really helps people and guides people to these discoveries, this wisdom that they possess, much more so than perhaps just try and tell them directly.
So wisdom talk might feed into change talk potentially. Like it's a person sort of making a connection or having an insight like the one you just gave around self-compassion, self-pity, and thinking back to their childhood. And it may or may not be related to sustain or change talk, but it's likely to open up and go in a helpful direction for them.
I think that's a really good point. And I am still formulating some of this stuff, but I think that's right. I think wisdom talk becomes something of a bridge there. Of course, if someone says wisdom talk, there's some kind of wisdom talk, one of the common things that the listener might respond with is, oh yeah, right. So tell me more about that. That's what we would do with that. We don't want to think, we can now move to change. We keep it slow and we just say, oh, so tell me more about that. And then they give you a bit more, wisdom. And they sort of, this person might say, well, whenever I cried, I always felt like it upset Mum, it frustrated her. And so I always really tried to keep it in, but I don't think it works for me anymore. I just always feel so upset inside. And then the therapist says, yeah, in some ways you would like to be a little kinder to yourself with all of that and find a way to be more self-compassionate. And then the person says, yeah, no, it would be good to be more self-compassionate. And then you say, what would be some of the reasons there? And so now we're into change talk. So I think you're right. I think that's a nice way of considering wisdom talk, is that it really allows for a deeper exploration of what this is really all about and how it works for them. Almost like they create their own formulation of themselves. And from there we can have that gentle curiosity that gradually takes us towards change.
Is change talk always what we want? Like, are there times where you've experienced people settling on not changing that really felt like the right thing for them?
Yes, motivational interviewing is goal directed. We do want to help people to move in the direction of well-being and sort of be able to help them advocate for that and so on. But it's also really client-centered, and so we respect choices. And one of the things that sometimes that means is that we might respect people's choice not to change. And that's absolutely where sometimes people will arrive. We might be doing, kind of the best MI that we can do and whatever. And in the end, people decide, no, I'm actually not going to give up smoking. Or, actually, no, I don't want to pursue self-compassion. And so respecting choices there is really important. Not that we resign. It's not about resignation or giving up. We might say, okay, that's cool. Self-compassion's not for you. What is something that you do feel would be helpful right now in your life? What are some other things that you might like to change? And so we can start to work with perhaps other things. But the interesting thing actually about respecting choices and respecting people's choice not to change is that it actually makes it more likely that they will change.
Right.
Funny sort of way.
Oh, the paradox.
It's kind of paradoxical, but I remember many years ago now, I was working in a hospital, sort of a young whippersnapper psychologist, somewhere, and the cardiologist told me to go and tell his patient to stop smoking. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea. And so off I went and went into the person. I said, hello, Mr. So-and-so, my name's Stan. I'm the psychologist here. And he was like, oh, here we go again. You people coming in here and telling me to stop smoking. And, I'm sick of hearing it and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh I certainly respect that. I understand. I'll leave you be. And as I was leaving the room, I heard this, oi! And I turned around and he said, well, what were you going to say? And there was this really interesting lesson for me that literally in that case, or just even, metaphorically, if we're willing to kind of walk away from whether the person should change or not, often they'll invite you back in to have the conversation, and then we're on our way. Then we can have this conversation about it. I think respecting choices like that really just liberates people. It frees them up. No longer do they have to defend, one side of their ambivalence. No longer do they have to defend not changing. Now they can open themselves up to whether they might want to change or not, and then they have the conversation.
It seems a very precious part of motivational interviewing is evoking hope and confidence.
Yes, absolutely. That's, if you think about it, when we try to tell people what to do, they get annoyed or angry, or they sort of don't come back to the next session, or they kind of shut down. Or actually what we do when we try to direct people or tell people to change, we're actually activating their threat system. That's what you're sort of saying. We're activating their fight-flight response. And so, of course, they fight or flee, the conversation. Whereas motivation, when we're being evocative like that, it opens it up, it creates confidence and optimism, and sometimes people can't even imagine what it would be like to change. They can't even imagine it. And so in some ways, MI is really just this approach of just helping people to envision something that they can't even imagine yet. And along with that, as you say, comes hope and optimism and confidence and just that possibility. Wow, maybe I could do this.
What are some of the maybe key takeaways from your expertise in motivational interviewing and compassion-focused therapy that might be most helpful for our listeners?
Well, behavior change is difficult. And actually, compassion and self-compassion are difficult. We feel ambivalent about it, and that's okay. In fact, we ought to feel ambivalent about it. We ought to allow that part of ourselves to really explore. There are good and not so good sides to everything, even compassion. And compassion isn't boundless. There will be things, where we aren't able to go beyond that, with our compassion. Right at the moment, for example, a lot of people, there's financial insecurity, there's worries about health and the pandemic, kids are homeschooling, and various other things. We're hunkering down at the moment. There are some very legitimate reasons why we might not right now go out and kind of do things outside of the family or maybe outside of our community, but we can still sort of explore compassion kind of closer to home. So yes, we definitely want to accept and validate the fears, blocks, and resistances.
I think that's really key. As you were saying that, it just really struck me, this sort of inviting the ambivalence as not a problem, just like, of course, we're going to think different ways about something. I think as I'm thinking about it now that, and I don't know if it's like this in Australia or in Western culture or the US in general, but it's sort of not, there's a broader cultural message that it's not okay to think more than one way about something or to have nuanced views or to be of two minds. There's this feeling of like one is supposed to be strong and confident and secure in one's decision. And it's really pathologizes or problematizes this ambivalence, which, as you're saying, is normal. So that feels like a sense of relief comes over me. It's like, right, it's okay to be ambivalent. It makes sense that you think more than one way about something.
Yes, because what's the consequence of how, the idea that we should only think one way? Well, it's that we'll be judged and that we'll be shamed and that we will sort of shame ourselves. So, I mean, ambivalence is really important, that ability to explore. I mean, I've been sort of saying both sides, but really, the many sides that we might feel and think about change or action or what to do next. We have these tricky brains, and they mean that we feel multiple ways about any given thing, and that's absolutely okay. In MI, it is a little bit about coming to resolving ambivalence to a certain extent, and being able to decide what to do next. It's just that we really honour the ambivalence to begin with, and we learn from the sustained talk, and we explore the change talk, and we really sort of take our time to consider all of that, and then arriving at a decision that really is in the service of our own well-being and the well-being of others. Of course, one of the things that Bill Miller said or says is, never underestimate ambivalence, though, either. Because even when we've made the decision to make a change, there'll still be ambivalence there. The person who's like me, actually, I get up on a Monday and a Wednesday morning at 6 a.m. and go to personal training. And every morning I feel ambivalent about it, to be honest. But also I have this commitment that I will do it. And also the personal trainer is waiting at the park for me, so I have to be there. So yes, I think ambivalence is really, actually, you're right. I think it is a very important thing to sort of, the ambivalence is okay, and there really are multiple sides to everything. All of this suffering, it's not our fault. We're born with these tricky brains that were designed for us, not by us, and they come along with all sorts of thoughts and feelings and physical sensations and urges and so on that sometimes we'd really rather not have, and that cause us a lot of suffering. And then we're shaped by these experiences, the stuff we were talking about a moment ago, the little and big experiences that shape us and how we exist in the world, and especially in our relationships with each other. So it's not our fault, but it is our responsibility. That's the compassion focused therapy idea, and so, because we know that our brain also has the capacity to learn and change and grow and flourish. And so motivational interviewing can really help with exploring, mind awareness, knowing and understanding our own minds, practicing some of the attributes and skills that we might need to live a more compassionate life, evoking the wisdom talk and doing the guided discovery, and just gradually committing to being more compassionate towards others, maybe to start with, or being open to receiving compassion from others, or offering ourselves compassion whenever we might need it most. All of those are challenging, but all of those are also very helpful for well-being and sort of general life satisfaction and so on. May I be helpful rather than harmful towards myself and others. That sort of captures all of that for me.
You also co-wrote the chapter Compassion as the Highest Ethic, which talks about compassion as possibly a hardwired ethical compass. I wonder if you could say a few things about that.
Compassion is there. It's a part of us already, a part of our evolved brains and how they work. Evolution is focused on survival and reproduction, which is great, but many of the brain functions that helped us survive also cause us a lot of suffering. I mean, that fight, flight, freeze, appease response is a classic example, really, of that. It helped us survive, but it causes us a lot of suffering. But actually, we also survived because we looked after one another. You can be cruel. We can be cruel to each other, and we can be cruel actually to other species, to be honest. But in fact, we are also a very compassionate species. Lots of archaeological evidence has shown that we've always looked after our young, of course, but our elderly or sick or disabled or injured, we have this innate compassion motivation. The threat system of the brain, we don't really have to practice that. We don't really have to practice anxiety or anger, for example. And sometimes the threat system kind of activates in reaction to the idea of compassion. Really that's what the fears, blocks and resistances are. They're part of that threat system. But with practice and finding a way to soothe and calm the body and maybe use imagery and behavioural exercises, and there's some very well-established practices now that really can help us to allow our natural, innate compassion motivation to just bubble up and become, a guiding principle to our lives.
And also your chapter, you guys argue that compassion-based interventions can make a difference in human relationships and human culture more broadly.
Yes. Yeah, well, James Kirby and Cassie Telligen, they're colleagues of mine here at UQ and myself, did a sort of a meta-analysis actually a couple of years ago looking at compassion-based interventions. Do they work? Do they help? And so, as you know, a meta-analysis is where we bring together a whole bunch of other published studies and then kind of calculate the effect of the interventions across all of those studies. And we found, yes, they do work. Compassion-based interventions such as compassion-focused therapy, mindful self-compassion, compassion cultivation training. Firstly, they do seem to increase compassion and self-compassion. Secondly, they do seem to significantly reduce anxiety, depression, and psychological distress. And finally, they increase psychological well-being. So, yeah, we can cultivate compassion, which in turn reduces difficult emotional states and increases well-being. I mean, imagine if we could really scale that up, imagine if young people in schools or people in workplaces or people all around the world could learn about how to engage with suffering in others, but also ourselves, and feel willing and able to do something to help. Just imagine that.
Right. That's very, very, very consequential given the challenges that we as a species and various societies face. There's a lot riding on this beyond personal fulfillment, it seems.
Absolutely. I think and hope that actually, we're coming into more of an age of compassion. I know there's a lot going on, and I know there's some sort of, very scary stuff, but actually there is this movement that's happening, and there's certainly lots of research. There's a lot being practically implemented, and yeah, I think so. We're coming into an age of compassion.
Yeah, these ideas are getting more traction, it seems, more attention. They're maybe a little less fringe than they had been in years past. And
yes. Yeah.
So thank you so much for your time today, Stan. This has been a fabulous conversation. If people have enjoyed hearing from you and hearing about your work, where can they find you and learn more?
Oh, yes. Well, I do love to talk about this stuff and also hear people's thoughts and views. So by all means, get connected. I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, of course. So look me up there. And I have that YouTube channel, Alex, you mentioned before. Thank you. That's just search for Dr. Stan Steindl. I actually call it affectionately Compassion in a T-shirt. But just do short videos.
Lots of great short educational videos on these broad topics.
Yeah, trying to keep them all under 10 minutes and make them in pretty plain language but all about, compassion and self-compassion and cultivating the compassionate mind. I'm happy too for people to be in touch by email if they like. I'm at stan@psychologyconsultants.com.au. Oh, and exciting news. I have a book coming out shortly. I hope you don't mind me mentioning that.
Please do.
Yeah, it's called The Gifts of Compassion. And it's a self-help style book, and from a compassion-focused therapy point of view and how to work with one's own suffering. So, yes, I'm hoping that's going to possibly come out before Christmas or maybe early in the new year.
I feel a second interview coming on.
Excellent. Thanks. That would be fun.
Great. All right. Well, thanks again, Stan. This is a great conversation. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Stan. Thanks for listening today.
If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll hit subscribe, leave us a great rating or review, and spread the word. You can also go to noblemindpodcast.com to join our email list. You'll get a weekly behind-the-scenes message, news, announcements, and other special goodies we come up with just for you. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.